Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Food, Wine, and Travel Show, where we go across country and travel the world with members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. Let's go. Welcome, everybody. Every third Monday. Yep, we get to travel the country or around the world with the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association, where we get to chat with their members. And today we have Sandra Bornstein joining us. She is a Colorado-based travel writer, freelance travel writer, and an author. She is the author of May This Be the Best Year of Your Life. And that's if you are looking at living outside of America, being an expat. And I know a lot of people doing it. And we've done it and it's fun. So you should try it if you want to. So we're going to talk a little bit about her work. Also, her other book is an award-winning book called 100 Things to Do in Boulder Before You Die. And today we're going to talk about death a little bit. We're going to talk about travel and the grieving process. You can keep up with Sandra. Go to sandrabornstein.com and also the travelingbornsteins.com. The links are all in the episode notes, including a couple of links to articles she has written about traveling through grief. So welcome. How are you, Sandra?
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for allowing me to share my story on your
No,
program.
I'm glad you are coming onto the show to talk about, grief is a very personal process and it's complex. And just when you think you're over it, you're not. And so it's one of those things that you know, everyone deals with it in a different way, but I love the fact that you are continuing to travel since the passing of your husband. You just keep going, and I think there's different ways to travel and it's going to go according to each person, right, on how they do this. But do you think it's helped you? Because I know when I've lost people that, I mean, one was a musician that was very dear to me, very close, and we were in a band together. And after when he passed, I could barely listen to music, which is the opposite. Normally it's my salvation. But because we had done so much with so much music and written and listened and critiqued, anytime a song came on that I know that we knew, it was very difficult. And then all of a sudden I wanted, like, then I was like a fiend and I just wanted so much music. It was weird. So is that the same kind of thing for travel as well, as like instead of being in the same spot where everything reminds you of the person, is to kind of create new memories?
It's a very interesting question because initially I thought that if I chose places that I'd been to before, I would have these flashback moments where waves of grief would take over, and I'd become super emotional. And obviously, especially during the first year of grieving, I wanted to minimize the amount of embarrassing moments in public. Believe me, I have plenty of moments in my home when I have crying spells. But so the first trip I decided to take was something totally different than anything I'd ever done before, hoping that it wouldn't create any issues with me. And it was relatively early in the process. Within weeks of my husband's death, and he had suffered significantly. So I dealt with anticipatory grief for a long period of time.
Oh, yeah.
He had a traumatic brain injury in 2010 from a skiing accident. And then about 10 years later, while traditional doctors don't link the dots together, non-traditional medical providers think it's too much of a coincidence, he developed terminal brain cancer, also known as glioblastoma. And he suffered from that for 3 years, all of which it was during COVID, and we continued to travel, even though he underwent a craniotomy,
Whoa.
chemo and radiation, along with radiation. And when we were relatively fine for 2.5 years, and then when it came back, when the tumor recurred, it was in an inoperable place, and life spiraled out of control pretty quickly. So our travel opportunities became less and less. So fortunately, during that whole period of COVID, while most people were worried about COVID and didn't travel, we continued to travel with the fear of COVID, as well as and at any moment, anything terrible. There are a lot of things that could have gone wrong with him while we were traveling, and we traveled overseas. We traveled all over the place. So the long and short of it, shortly after he died, as a travel writer, I get a lot of promotional information, and I had this notification from Uniworld advertising solo fares. And as many of your viewers know, the cruise industry doesn't necessarily cater to solo travelers. They oftentimes want you to pay a supplement or sometimes pay for the second person who is in the cabin. I thought, wow, I can go on a trip and not have to pay for my husband, or pay some supplement. Should I do this? And then I saw the window of opportunity was just a few months out because it was a flash sale. They were trying to sell cabins. So I was like, am I going to be ready? Am I, can I handle this? Can I travel to Europe by myself from the United States? So I figured, well, that's what travel insurance is for. I'd never done travel insurance allowing you to get out for any reason. It ended up, since it was only my fare, it was very reasonably priced. I could cancel for any reason. I think within, I don't know, it was like 36 or 48 hours before departure. I said, okay, by then I should know whether I should be able to handle this. So I booked the cruise. And then I had buyer's remorse. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Am I going to go traveling by myself? I'm a new widow. How am I going to do this? I can barely function. Some days were harder than others. And I kept on telling myself, I can do it. I can do it. I can do this. And my kids were very supportive. I have 4 sons. They were very supportive. I wasn't sure if they thought, what they would think that I was traveling so quickly. Most of my friends were very supportive. And the day came, the Uber arrived at my house, and I had some trepidations getting into the Uber. But I took this wonderful, remarkable Rhine cruise in October. My husband had died in July, all by myself. I spent a couple days in Basel by myself, exploring the city. Used one of my contacts who used to be in the Swiss industry, is now in another location. Used him as where the best place for me to stay was in Basel. Had a great time. The boat, I wasn't filled, but there was a significant number of other solo passengers. Many of them were widows. Some of them were divorced, were single by choice. And I had, I don't know, an incredible time considering I was grieving. I didn't go to the nighttime activities. I didn't feel like live music. I didn't feel like being around people too much. But I took every shore excursion I could, did everything I possibly could. And I wasn't, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure how I would be. So I had 4 books with me in case I wanted to stay in my cabin and not socialize. I didn't know. It was unpredictable. It was uncharted waters. But from that experience, I came home, I don't know, empowered to a certain extent, knowing that it was possible for me to travel an early stage in the grieving process, and that it was good for me to start seeing good things in life, joy, because my life had been taken over by anticipatory grief for so long, had been overrun by intense grief when my husband passed away. And now I could start to see that, yeah, I can enjoy life. And so it was great. I think it was really good that I chose a place that was totally different from anything that I had done with my husband. One exception we had, one of the stops was in Frankfurt, and I'd been there on a media trip. And so I was a little bit nervous when I got off the boat and wandered around in Frankfurt, how I'd be, but it was okay. I managed okay. There were certain things that I remembered, and that would elicit good memories, because I had good memories of that trip, and then it was fine. I was able to handle it. And the hard part for me was I had always traveled either with my husband or on a media trip where there were other people to share. So at night when I'd go back to my cabin, it was hard. Because nobody to share the day's events with.
That's what I was going to say. That would be the hard part. But once you go through that, you start to learn about yourself, and like you can do things on your own. You know what I mean? Not saying that you can't do things on your own. Not saying that you're not able, or you know what I mean? Or And it's not codependency either. It is just you're used to someone by your side that you shared moments with, right? And memories with. And then to do it on your own, it's like you want to turn around and you're used to even just those actions, all those little things you're used to
Or
doing.
when
Yeah.
things go wrong, or you get confused in an airport, or you get
Yeah.
or you get confused when you're wandering around an unfamiliar town, and you have the second person to say, like, which way should we go? What should we do?
Yeah.
Now I had to be very aware that it was up to me. Obviously, there could be other people either good Samaritans or people, fellow passengers who could help me, but I had to be more cognizant of my capabilities. And like I said, it wasn't like I couldn't do that, but you have to understand, I'm not unique, but unlike many of the people of my generation who waited to get married, I married my husband as a teenager. So I married my
Okay.
husband when I was in college. So basically I went from a dorm room to living with my husband, and then suddenly he was gone. So even a simple thing, even though I have read, the brain fog is kind of interesting. You don't necessarily process everything as you normally would. So I read what the weather was going to be on this cruise. It was mid-October, so it was going to be chilly in Europe. I didn't bring all the appropriate things like gloves, scarves, those kind of things, because we were going to go be on the deck to watch the castles. So Frankfurt was before, it was Amsterdam, I mean, it was Basel to Amsterdam. So when I stopped in Frankfurt, I knew pretty soon I was going to have to be outside, and the forecast was not very favorable. So when I was in Frankfurt, I had to go look for gloves and for a hat, because I knew I would freeze otherwise, even though I'm a Coloradan. And what can I say? I was like, oh my God, I can do this. And it's so silly. I should be able to go shopping, but I was so used to going with my husband. I figured out that the people on the ship told me where to go, where the shopping district was. Surprisingly, they didn't have much choices, but I did find what I needed. So it was sufficiently clothed when I just stood outside. Most of the people went inside. It was pretty cold, but they gave you blankets and hot cocoa, and it was a fun
Oh,
experience.
that's, I think this is great because it's kind of like a new chapter of your life in a way that you have to look at and still have those memories. And now traveling, do you travel with other writers at all, or how, are you still kind of
So
going solo on
basically,
places?
the first year I splurged because I can't keep up at this pace. I took 2 other trips to Europe. I also took a trip to a wellness resort in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And I'm a grandma of 7, and I skied 35 times. That's the luxury of living in Colorado. That's more than I ever skied before. Skiing was my husband's passion, more so than mine. I know that my days of doing it are limited, so I kind of maybe went overboard. But skiing and grieving, I actually wrote 2 stories about that. It's like a new niche. Was a wonderful way for me to deal with my grief, because think about it. I was outside. I chose my days mostly in the sunshine. I was active, which is really good for the chemical imbalance that happens when you're grieving. And the social isolation was solved because I could randomly talk to people on the lifts. I might never see them again, but I didn't have to spend whole days all by myself.
Mm.
And some of those people I did become friends with. And then I eventually found, it took a while, found 55 plus groups that I could ski with. In particular, there's a wonderful group at Copper Resort, which I also wrote about. And there's a less formal one at Keystone Resort, because I ski in Summit County, Colorado. And the grief was, I was saying, to a certain extent minimized, because I could get my frequent doses of
Mm.
sunshine,
Yeah,
activity,
sunshine does
being with
everything,
people,
man.
and um, I had a great time. In the middle of that, I decided out of nowhere, just there was this thought, I need to go to an ocean. It's like, why do I want to go to an ocean? Well, oceans were very soothing.
Why not?
And my husband and I always loved going to the ocean. More me, he didn't like the sun that much. So I said, okay, I didn't want to spend a lot of money. Hawaii was too pricey. California was kind of pricey because this was February. Florida was pricey. So I found a wellness place. I was first like, what am I going to do at a resort? I'm going to sit
Yeah.
by myself. I'm going to eat by myself. Where can I go where I potentially am around others? And while my husband was dying, we had gone to two wellness resorts in the West, one in Utah and one in Arizona. And I remembered from those experiences that there were a lot of women traveling by themselves, and sometimes they would eat together.
Mm,
So it was perfect. I found Hilton Head Health, and I went there.
nice.
Most people there are for weight loss. I was just there for recuperation and I guess a break from skiing and to be at the ocean. But like you said, would I be able to handle some place where I'd been before? I had been to Hilton Head before. I didn't realize, I didn't look on a map, how close it was to a media trip that I had taken to Hilton Head before COVID. So the beach, the wellness place took us to every morning for our sunrise walks was the same place where I'd stayed with my husband.
Oh,
First day, here I am in a bus of 10 or 12 other people, barely knew these people. We pull up to the resort where I had stayed several years before, and I'm like, Sandy, keep your
yeah.
keep yourself together. You can't have a meltdown. You're with these people that you just met. And I was able to control it, but it was really interesting. I had a paradoxical reaction. Instead of having a meltdown, I felt comfort there.
Mm,
I went every morning for these sunrise walks. I rented a bicycle. It was about a mile and a half away. Went back to the beach because if anybody's been to Hilton Head, the sand is compressed. So it's
mm-hmm.
beautiful to ride on during low tide. And so I'd go back there every day when I wanted a break from the wellness stuff. And then one day they brought us back for like a sunset walk. I
Mm-hmm.
did Tai Chi on the beach there.
Nice.
I was in a really good place when I came back from Hilton Head.
That's
And
awesome.
I don't know, I was just energized. And then subsequently, because I just celebrated recently, in Jewish tradition, it's called Yortzeit. It was the first, that's a Yortzeit is an anniversary of the person's death. I recently celebrated the anniversary of my husband's death, and it was my goal to do as much travel as I could during this first year. And so I rounded out the year. I took a Mediterranean cruise as well as another riverboat cruise. To actually the Venetian lagoons.
Ooh,
And um, both of those places included lots of places that I'd been to with my husband, Ira, and I was able to handle both of those trips remarkably well. The Mediterranean cruise was actually a cruise we had booked together. I wasn't so sure how that was going to
oh,
work because we'd booked it together. And I had a wonderful time on that cruise. And this most recent Venetian lagoon trip was in June, beginning of July. And on that trip, there were just once again, that was a solo supplement waiver trip through Uniworld, and that boat had quite a few of widows and people and some people, women traveling by themselves. And we were able to bond and have a really nice group. I never had to eat alone.
that's
I was
nice.
always on excursion with people that I knew. And I had an incredible time. What can I tell you? And so I'm learning that, yes, I have my moments. I'm going to grieve. Like you said, grief never goes away. Grief is part
Mm-mm.
of life, especially when you lose somebody that you've been married to for almost 5 decades.
I think what happens is you learn, you just get better at dealing with it.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
it gets a little bit softer. It's not as harsh.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard once again to go back to a cabin by
And
yourself,
you've changed routines a bit too.
or
And
or
that's the
or
thing.
or when I sit back and I reflect. And what I do, which I've been doing for a long time, is that I create books
Mm,
of my trips. which also helps me. Well, it's multifolded. It gives my grandkids something to look at to see what their grandma does, and as well as my kids, but more my grandkids. My grandkids like to look at this, but it also helps me. Oftentimes I go back and I write about things, sometimes shortly after I experience them, but sometimes I recap things and go back. So I'm able to remember things better because each of my trips have one of these books. And so, especially now that my husband's gone, I mean, I'm really glad I've started doing this. I'd say, I don't know, probably 12, 15 years ago is when I first started doing it. So I've got tons of these. As a travel writer, you know, I've taken a lot.
Yeah, you can't, because that's the thing I was gonna say. What, as travel writers, we're of that ilk of, we travel and we want everyone to know. We can't shut up about our travels, right? None of us can. We're like, hey, we went here and you must do this. Like if you tell any travel writers, like IFWTWA, if you go on their site, hey, I'm going here, you're going to get a response. Make sure you do this. Make sure you see that. And then it's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then you go do it. And then you want to pass it on to everyone. So even you, like, your travel has changed, with your husband being by your side, but then, there's media trips and things too. But I also think the beauty of travel during grief is it changes routine. It's a pattern interrupt, because death is a pattern interrupt of what is going on. And so to go back to the usual routine is very painful. It's like if you wake up every morning and you both have coffee and read a newspaper together, that's, I mean, you want to get rid of that. Or sometimes you want to go back to it, right? Because it's kind of in and out.
It's interesting that you said that, because when I came back from my latest trip, it was, I want to say, a Debbie Downer, but I'd had such a good time. And then I walked into my house and reality hit. Okay, I'm back to the reality that I'm here by myself. There's, for the present time, I don't have, I do have travel writing, but I don't have a job or whatever to keep me occupied all day long. And I started thinking, okay, where is travel going to fit into my life, and where is my life going? Because am I running away or running to travel? What is going on here? Because why did I need to, I'm going to say escape, but it is, travel is a form of escape. It's also, it's learning about culture and experiencing, but it's also escaping from your day-to-day life. I can't afford to travel to Europe, 3 times a year and ski that much and do all these things. So what am I going to do with my life? And I decided that I have to focus now on creating community, because when my husband was dying, and even when he had the traumatic brain injury, he became withdrawn. So my social circles decreased. And then that was somewhat exacerbated because when he was dying, we traveled extensively. So we were never home, because I knew we were on a very short, he was given 12 to 18 months and he lived 3 years. Wow. So we jam-packed a lot. We went.
It's like every time there's an extra month, let's go.
Well, we went, what can I say? We went everything from, we went to we went horseback riding in the winter time at a dude ranch. He hung upside down doing aerial yoga at a wellness resort. We were in Hawaii, we were in Florida. We went to Iceland. We went to Israel. We went to Spain and Portugal. We went on several.
But this is so, I mean, really, we have to live life, while we have it.
We have to live life. But then I realized I can't do that. It's not sustainable now that, he was the breadwinner. So it's not sustainable. So I've waited the year, and and everybody said, don't sell anything, don't do anything major. But I've decided where I live, there's not a sense of community. So I'm going to move to, I'm not old, but I'm moving to a 55 plus. I'm going to sell my home. I'm in the process of selling my home. And move to a 55 plus community. And then travel will be continue to be part of my life. But I think it's also important for me to, at this point in time, and not everybody, some people are content with it, I have to have a fresh start. I have to reestablish who I am. Because remember, I was that 18-year-old girl. I mean, girl. My husband. I now have to figure out who I am and what I'm going to do. And I saw through travel, that it is possible to have joy again. And I am
Mm-hmm.
capable of doing things on my own, organizing, functioning, handling missteps, whatever happened, whatever came my way, I was able to handle. But I also have to figure out what I'm going to do day to day. And it wasn't an easy decision, but I figured now's the time to do it. And I'm young enough to do it. And I'll still figure out, not really sure. I really have no idea where I'm gonna travel to next. I shouldn't say that. One of my sons said to me, Mom, um, let's see who wants to go with, to celebrate my birthday's in September. And so let's do a, family trip. Unfortunately, the other sons, my other three sons, it's not convenient for them, but I'm gonna go away for my birthday with one of my kids and his two little kids. So
Cool.
intergenerational travel trip. And then, which I've done several of, and then I'll sort of see, but in the process, I'm kind of busy because I'm going to be selling my house.
See, but
And
that's all pattern interrupt too. So it's like starting fresh, and that doesn't mean you're forgetting your husband. It doesn't
no,
mean it just is, hey, now it's something new, which kind of really it's relieving. Honestly, it is when you go somewhere new. Like I had a friend whose husband passed, and we knew he was terminal, and it was pretty quick. But they knew as soon as he was terminal, they moved to a smaller house. So financially, all of that. And then it was like, then later remarried. My friend remarried, never thinking it would ever happen, but it did. And to kind of change it all up, they moved so that they could have a fresh start because they were still in the same house. You know what I mean? It was just kind of a
well,
fresh start, and it's not forgetting. It's not forgetting whatsoever. It is actually just going, okay. And then when you do that, you're allowing it to be memories that are the ones you really want to remember, right? Yet while you're doing your own thing and being stronger as just you. You know what I mean? So it's like you're starting a new life, but it's a I think travel is everything. You discover more about yourself in different situations. You're out of your comfort zone every single time you travel. Every time you get in your car, you're out of your comfort zone because you never know what's going to happen, right? So it's
and it's the people we meet
it's
along
exciting.
the journey. What can I tell you? It's not just the places that we see on this last trip. That particular riverboat, there were people from Australia, there were people from throughout Europe, quite a few from the UK, and of course Americans. But Americans from all over the place,
Mm,
all from the
that's
east to the
nice.
west, to the south to the north. There were people that I met, and so I find travel it's not just necessarily um, the
Oh, it's the people.
destinations you go to or the culture, the history you learn about, or the activities that you do. It's the people you travel with and also the people you meet, the
Hmm.
locals. I've met
Yeah.
some very interesting local people who have enriched my life in terms of what I've learned about their way of life, the foods they eat, the customs and the traditions that they have. And I've learned so much in the process, and my life is so much more enriched by all of these experiences. And I think that's why I think my grandkids are just, they're always thumbing through my albums because, like, Grandma, what's this? Like, where's this? When did you do this? And I recently did a very large one of these books, Shutterfly books, to memorialize my husband's life for his year anniversary, and also his birthday is August 19th, which I believe when this show is
Hmm.
broadcast. And I sent one to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is still alive. She's 95 years old and lives in suburban Chicago. And she was just like, wow, look at all these pictures. Because I harvested
Mm.
pictures from her collection, starting from his birth pictures till the very end. And it's 100 pages long, kind of showing different things we did as a family, different things he did in his youth, different things we did
Mhm.
before we had a family, then our family life. And then there were a lot of pictures on those pages. I think there were like 16 or 20 pictures on those pages, but several pages of all the travels we did. There was so much, it was
That's
very hard
cool.
to put down. And then he was a very prominent lawyer who argued successfully before the U.S. Supreme Court. So a little bit of information about his legal background. And then at the end, I interviewed him at the end, trying to create a living will. It was hard because by that time he had become more and more withdrawn. But I have some really good things that he said, and he reiterated what the motto that we used while he was dying, and I'm kind of living with it now, like keep moving and live without regrets, because I think that's part of the travel message. I think if you stay at home and never explore the world, I think your life is very limited. I mean,
Yes.
I get it. Some people it's financially not possible or physically not possible, or maybe they're afraid, or there's various reasons why you can't travel. Then at least read about it or watch about it.
Yes.
There's plenty of ways that you can learn about other places to enrich your life. You don't necessarily have to be there, or you can have somebody like me talk to you about all the places
Well,
I've
that's exactly it. I mean, you can't go everywhere, and we do a lot with national parks. We travel full time documenting parks, public lands, but not everyone can go to some of these parks and public lands, and not the parks can't handle everybody in the parks, right? So there's even a movement to get the parks outside the parks, so that if you can't go to Yellowstone, well, I'm going to tell you about Yellowstone and the bison, the buffalo, whichever one you want to say. Uh-oh. So you kind of, it's important because it travel is humbling, and it makes you realize just how grand and big the world is, and yet it's also teaches you how small the world is and how connected we actually are, no matter where. Like you're talking about, the groups of people that you meet on these kinds of excursions, I think are fantastic, because there's therapy groups, right? No matter what you're going through in life, there's some kind of group you can go to, and often you're sitting in a circle, everybody's crying and eating cookies and drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. Maybe, I don't know if they do that anymore, but it's kind of it's I think they're very helpful and necessary, but it's better to kind of go on an adventure where you're having something else to talk about as well, that's moving forward. I feel like sometimes because it's different for everyone, really. Groups where you're all sitting the same thing, it's almost like forced grieving. I can't explain it, but I think it's really helpful. But do you know what I mean? It's just a different kind of connection,
And
you know?
each of these trips, maybe because I didn't have my husband, this is also an interesting point as a solo traveler. When you travel with a companion or a spouse, most of your attention is focused on them, unless you maybe have a group that you've traveled with. Maybe it's more than just one person. So I'm going to say I didn't really pay attention to other people. We would casually meet people, but didn't really, I'm going to say, necessarily listen to everything they said, because I had my husband. As a solo passenger, I became more tuned in to other people. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I can't remember how long, maybe before I even married him, everybody had some kind of message. I had a takeaway. Just about everybody that I met, there was something significant that I learned from that person. I mean, on that Mediterranean cruise, and this is odd, and I can't explain because I've talked to somebody who does numbers, and this doesn't make any sense. So I was gone for less than 2 weeks. During that period of time, I met 4 ladies, and maybe how many people could I have talked to at any length to gather this information? Maybe the most 40 or 50 people, that even though I came across like 2,000 or 3,000 people on board the ship, but I didn't talk to all of them. So I came across 4 ladies who had one lady had lost her best friend to glioblastoma, and 3 others had lost their husband to glioblastoma.
Whoa.
Now, glioblastoma,
That's not that
a very
common.
rare
Yeah.
brain cancer that only, from what statistics tell me, 10 to 15,000 cases each year in the United States. Obviously, I don't know the worldwide figure. So you're talking about a very small population of people, and they die relatively quickly. And famous people like John McCain have died from it. Bo Biden died from it. There are famous people that have died from it, but the numbers are very small. In a 2-week period, I came across 4 people who were touched by this terrible disease. Each of them gave me something significant to walk away with. It
Mm.
was very powerful, very, very powerful. And they all came from different countries too.
See, I love that. I love that. That's, and it's,
I
yeah,
mean, I, the world is kind of interesting because I can't explain it. Nobody can explain to me why these people came into my life, but they made a difference in my life.
hmm
Just like the 5 or 6 ladies that I dined with every day in the Venetian lagoons. They made an impact on me. Whether I see any of these people again ever in my life, I don't know. Some I'm corresponding with, but they're helping me through the journey.
That's awesome.
And if I stayed in my home or stayed in my community and didn't venture very far during the first year, my life would not have been enriched like this.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
very lucky, very fortunate, that I spent the money. It was a lot more money than I wanted to spend, but that I did it for myself. Because I think my husband would be very proud of me
Mm.
that I didn't throw in the towel and let grief
Dominate.
take me over. Because
Yeah.
it does happen. Many of the widows, I will tell you, that I met on these journeys were very surprised that I could get out of my house the first year and get on an airplane by myself and not with a travel companion or with a group. All these trips I went by myself. I went totally
Yeah.
solo. And they said because the grief was so overwhelming, just suck them in. And it's because it's documented, the chemicals in your brain get all kind of screwed up. And so it's very hard to fight it. But I was determined that I didn't want to take drugs. Some people do that, or I didn't want to be a recluse or become morbid. That I was going to fight it, and I was going to live life to the fullest because
Mm.
that's what life is about.
I like that. I like that about you. I mean,
You have to live life. And fortunately, I had the avenue of skiing and travel. If people don't have that, then like I said, you can watch things about travel. You can read things about travel. You can go to different restaurants in your local town and taste different ethnic foods. And it's kind of like a vicarious way of traveling. So there's different ways that you can enrich your life and kind of, as you said, mix it up
Mm.
so that you don't get stuck. That's what happens with anticipatory grief. You kind of get stuck because it's eventually going to come, and then
And everyone thinks, oh, well, you knew it was coming. I actually think it's almost
it's
worse.
actually worse because when it does come,
Yeah.
it's here's reality.
Yeah. Well, my mom's brother, who she was very close to, got murdered, and it was, it was on the news right in front of us, and I'll never forget that day. And you could see his body being put into the ambulance, and he'd been shot, and it was the largest industrial shooting in Florida ever. And they found him thanks to America's Most Wanted. And so she was just, I mean, it was not something you could just snap up and get over. And we had just started our magazine. This was in the late 90s, 97, 98. And we travel a lot. I mean, we've lived all over in Africa and all of that. And there she was, like the next day, not getting out of bed. And I'm like, oh, this is not good, because she is completely not a person. And then her best friend, who she'd seen on and off, when we lived in South Africa and Kenya, got brain cancer. And her best friend, so she got out of bed and started driving up to a different town where we're living in Southern California and go and see her. And the cancer had taken over so much she could barely even hold her head up. And she was in and it was really, but it meant the world to her. And so they kept meeting each other. And then her best friend died within 6 months of her brother. And so it was a very hard time, because sometimes there's also guilt, survivor's guilt kind of thing, especially with her brother. So she went through all of this, and I could see this is not this, she's going away, you know what I mean? And so we'd go up to the mountain town of Julian, which we ended up living in. And so we'd get away, we'd go for a hike in the mountains, and she'd start to come back to life. And I used to play music up there, and it was her birthday, and I'm like, well, let's go up to the mountain and we'll go see our friends and whatever. She's like, I don't know, no. come on, let's go. We'll go for a hike. We did all that. And that night, and she knew it was like music night. We called it a hoot night. It was like everybody comes and does open mic and it's fun. And out of the blue, I had friends come in from Mexico. I had friends come in from all over as a surprise party for her. And it totally just, first she was mad at me. She's like, "What the hell are you doing?" Like, you know, because that's a reaction, right? And it was so cool because everybody, it was very emotional for her too, because it was, how it is, it's like you fall down, don't make me cry when I fall down, don't be kind to me, otherwise I'm going to cry. And so it took a long time. It even today, talking about it like on shows, she can't really, it's hard. But travel helps. Being out in nature like you talk about, it was a solace. It's always been a solace. I mean, that's who we are as humans. Our thing is wildlife and nature. And you know, and when you've gone through that kind of loss, you have extra love that you give, especially like to animals, to people. There's this extra love that you were giving to somebody else that you now need to share with others. That's why the community part is so important, because if now you're not giving, that is actually the hardest part. So in the grief process, you need to go back to giving that love you were giving to someone else. It may have been a different kind of love, but to others. That's why the community, when you talk about that, is so crucial. And when you can meet new people and give different kinds of care to each other, then it's like this energy is what lifts you up and moves you forward. You know, action is the antidote to despair. It's my favorite quote by Joan Baez. So I think you've done a good job of that. Now, I do have a question. Are you going to write more, maybe write a book about this? You've done a book on expat, and then telling people what to do in Boulder before they die. I mean, that's a good one for you.
Now, that was
So,
that was kind of one of those weird things in life. COVID hit in, March or whatever of 2020, and we were in India, and we ran back obviously very quickly. And then I started, like everybody else, watching these webinars, and Reedy Press was looking for writers. Here's my book.
cool.
And I was like, while Josh, the publisher, was talking, I was doing Google search, like, where in Colorado don't they have a book? And like, where would I like to write a book? And I saw
Boulder,
that
my
they say
gosh.
hadn't done one for Boulder, and Boulder was special to me because I went to school there, and that's where I met my husband. And so I wrote him, he's not even done speaking. Like, do you have a book about Boulder? Would you like about? And he says, well, we have someone that might be interested. I got back to you. And he got back to me. That person's no longer interested. So then I created a marketing proposal and eventually won the contract to write the book. So that was, maybe May, June, somewhere in that time frame. End of July, beginning of August is when my husband was diagnosed with glioblastoma at the end of July and operated on in August.
Wow.
So I was under contract to write this book. Everything in Boulder was shutting down because, as you know, everything shut down everywhere, especially in university towns. And then I had a husband who was potentially, who knew was dying, but I didn't know what the future was going to bring. So I just stopped working on the book because I had a lot of other things to do. And I had two extensions on that book. One was I blamed on COVID, the other on my husband. Really, both were my husband. And then eventually my husband, Ira, said to me, the next deadline was coming. He said, you have to finish the book. I said, but there's a lot of places we have to go see, and it's still COVID and it's not safe. He said, I'll take the risk. You have to finish the book. We'll go to the restaurants, we'll go wherever. So we went and visited all the places I'd yet to go, crammed in a lot. We actually ended up with COVID because of it. Mild cases. We were okay. Even though he was immune compromised, we were fine. And I finished the book. Sadly, it was published in the fall of 2022. And the beginning of 2023 is when the tumor was diagnosed, and his decline in the last 6 months was pretty swift. And he was, totally dependent on me. So I didn't really market the book. It's marketed for like 3-4 months, and it is what it is. I hope to maybe market it. But this past year has been, I wasn't in a position, if you go market a book, you're like, hi, you want to read my book? I couldn't do that. I just couldn't pull that off. So I have talked actually to developmental at the first one. My first book was about living and working in India as a teacher. That was another hat I wore at an international school, and the trials and tribulations and the lessons learned during that journey. And so I went back to the developmental editor that helped me work on that. And we're kind of trying to figure out what direction I potentially might take. Because he said, whatever you want to do, it has to be uplifting,
How
and
about 100 places before you die?
I,
Just in general, since you've done so much travel, and there's a story for that. I mean, look at all the places, just 100 places before you die.
So I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do because once you have that writing bug in you, you have that desire to
Hmm.
write. I didn't put it this way. I didn't think I'd write about grieving. I wasn't sure I would write again because
Yeah.
it took me many months, just like when my husband was first diagnosed. I couldn't write for a good 6 months. The first story, he was diagnosed, like I said, in July. The first travel story I wrote was about skiing actually on New Year's Day with my husband after he had had, craniotomy and chemo and
Wow.
radiation. And we went skiing on New Year's Day to start the year. And the same thing sort of happened here. I didn't really write for several months until I wasn't even sure I was going to write, but Jewish Chicago, I had approached them because that Rhine River cruise was a Jewish heritage cruise. And so I approached them if they wanted the Jewish content from that, or if they wanted something about the fact that it took place when the war in Israel had just started.
Mm.
Instead, the editor came back and accepted that they would take a story from me in 600 words, which is not very much. 600 words is very small, on what it was like to take my first trip as a grieving widow.
Mm.
I can't tell you how that was definitely a deficit assignment, because I can't tell you how many days of thinking how I was going to do that, how I was going to pull that off. I did. I eventually wrote it, and I'm very happy with the piece that I wrote. It was very hard in 600 words, but I did pull it off. And then it got me thinking, well, maybe I should be writing more about this.
Mm.
Because maybe there are people out there um, who need to be inspired, that you don't necessarily have to sit um, in your home when you're a grieving widow.
No,
You,
no.
you shouldn't be partying or whatever and carrying on. I get that. And I didn't feel like doing that. And even this last trip on the Venetian Lagoon, one night when they had 70s music, I couldn't handle it. I
Mm.
just, it was too much for me. I handled music on the large cruise ship, but it must have been the songs, like you said, certain songs elicit certain memories. I have no idea. Actually, the captain on that ship, he gets a shout out to me. He saw that I was upset. He hugged me and he embraced me and he told me everything was going to be okay. He was
Yeah.
very, very, very soothing to me. Because you don't know, that's the whole, I think one of the reasons why um, widows and maybe widowers to a lesser extent are reluctant to go out in public. You don't know when something's going to cause you to have a meltdown,
Hmm.
because these things are very, very
Yeah. I
unpredictable.
mean, my mom, Nancy, we went to a meeting. It was a Chamber of Commerce mixer at a botanical garden. It was in San Diego and Encinitas Botanical Garden. I remember she was feeling absolutely fine. And then she was talking to someone, and something reminded her of her brother, and she literally went down like almost melted. She just started, she was like, and the person who was talking, and he's a funny guy. It was talking about Oktoberfest and all of that, because I'll never forget that conversation. And he just kind of lifted her arms and lifted her back up and just said, "It's okay, and we're gonna keep talking, and you're gonna be okay." And he had been through it. But I think it was really hard, especially when people were kind, because that makes it harder. Like if people are kind, you want them to be kind, but it elicits tears. It makes it harder. But it's like there's an art to it. That that grieving is it's a whole other lifestyle, actually. It is. It's how to live with it. And But I think you continue writing and traveling. I think that is phenomenal for folks to connect with you on that because, like we said, everyone's going to go through this at some point in their life. Whether it's a husband, a wife, a friend, a colleague, it's grief is grief, and I think in reading, it's very personal and people can connect on that on their own how and when, and they can reread. You know what I mean? So I think you keeping on doing it is good, and I'm glad you came on the show today to talk about it here. I know that everyone, if IFWTWA.org is a website to go to, and definitely, inspiring to hear to keep writing. It takes time, as you were saying, but to keep going with what your soul and passion is, it's very important. So I want to give everyone your websites again so that they can follow you, the travelingbornsteins.com and also sandrabornstein.com. And go get 100 things to do in Boulder before you die. She needs to market it, so go get it.
Yeah, get the
You're
word
really
out.
pressed.
What can I tell you? All the things I had scheduled in 2023 had to be canceled.
Well,
But
it's
it did win the NATJA, honorable mention for travel
well,
book that
that's
year.
awesome. See?
And I was recently acknowledged by, even though it's not a history book, there was a historical preservation society in Boulder in the summer that recognized my book, and I received an award because I included history and culture in the book. But
So
then again,
cool.
I've got a bachelor's and master's degree in history, so it's something that I always try and bring to the table when I write
Awesome.
about
That
travel.
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I've appreciated the opportunity to share my story, and hopefully, I sincerely hope that my words and my actions encourage people that are grieving to step outside of their comfort zone and perhaps use some form of travel, whether it's vicarious or actual travel, to enrich their lives, to hopefully get through the grieving process.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Food, Wine, and Travel Show, featuring members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. We encourage you to visit their website. We say IFWTWA, which is IFWTWA.org. You can also follow us at bigblendradio.com. Happy travels, everyone!